Hey everybody, and welcome to this, my second of two videos on the Canon AE-1 program. In the first video, we talked about what everything on the camera is. In this video, we're going to talk about how to do everything with this camera. So by the end of this video, you should have no questions about how to do everything. First thing we're going to do is we're going to change the battery because this camera requires a battery to do everything. It is fully electronic, so nothing on this battery can be done except perhaps admiring the gorgeous design aesthetics without a battery. To get into the battery chamber, if you have the grip, then you just need to grab a nickel or something, loosen the screw, and then you can finish up the unscrewing with your thumb. There we go, and slide it right off to the side just like this. This has a little notch here, so it slides left and right. Dang it, there we go. On this little mushroom right there. To get into the battery chamber, it's a little bit easier if you don't have a lens on the camera. So I'm going to take this lens off. The next thing you want to do is grab your battery chamber opener. See this little tab here? It will allow you to open the battery chamber. You just slide it right in like this and lift. And now the battery chamber pops open. I'm going to close this again because let's assume that you have lost the flash hot shoe cover battery chamber opener. Just a standard little flathead screwdriver. There we go. You don't want to use your fingernail because your finger and fingernail are very big. You can mash this right here. The most common failure, the most common thing to break on AE-1, AE-1 program, and A1 cameras is this little latch right here. So as these have gotten older, I am unaware of a 3D printed version as of this video's recording, so getting these replaced, there are fewer and fewer of them out there, so just be mindful of how you open that. To remove the camera battery, you can just grab your, there is a way to do this, I know, I've done it before. There we go. Grab your chamber opener and get yourself a little bit of a corner there. And now you can finish that off with your fingers and pull out the PX28, also called an LR44 battery. Just as a matter of personal preference, I only use Duracell batteries in my cameras. Energizer, Sanyo, and Panasonic make fine batteries as well. You want to use a name brand battery in your camera because an off-brand, a no-name, a generic, something like that, there are many of these available on everybody's favorite online mega retailer. They can break and they can burst much more easily. And a burst camera repair is very expensive. It's much more expensive than decades worth of good batteries. So save yourself some money in the long run and just shell out for a good battery. You only need to replace these maybe once every 8 to 12 months anyway, assuming your capacitors work well. So this is what a good clean battery chamber looks like right here. If you take your finger and you push down on the contact on the bottom, it should spring down and spring back up very easily. If you have some like white or green crud in here from an exploded battery, you can clean that out with distilled white vinegar on a cotton swab, followed by 91% isopropyl alcohol on a cotton swab. The reason you use distilled white vinegar first is that these are alkaline batteries. Vinegar is an acid. They neutralize each other. You can neutralize the alkaline crystallization that's in there, clean it out with some dry cotton swabs, and then go over it with a rubbing alcohol cotton swab, and that cleans up your contacts to ensure good electrical communication. And at that point, if your camera's still not working, then there's a bigger issue. So at any rate, to put a new battery in, there's a guide on the inside of the chamber here for positive and minus. Just put it in negative side first, push in the positive. We're going to close the battery chamber door. We're going to put the grip back on. Start it with our fingers, finish it with the nickel or whatever coin you're going to use. I guess maybe I didn't get it started very well with my fingers. That sometimes happens. These old screws are a little bit soft and sometimes they don't like to grip right away. But there we go. It should go in pretty easily, and you know it's attached well if there's basically no wiggle, very little wiggle in it. And now we have changed the battery, and we are ready to go and start using the camera, right? Well, first let's double check that the battery works. You can hit the shutter button, and that's just a fine way to double check it. The other way you can double check the battery is to push down on the battery check button. There we go. It's beeping, so that tells us the battery is good. So there we go. I think there's a slower beep or no beep. If there's no beep, clearly the battery is not good. But I think it's a slower beep if the battery is getting weak. Okay, next thing we're going to do is we're going to mount and remove lenses from the Canon AE-1 program, and we're going to talk about the different kinds of lenses that this can use. All right, so we're going to start with this lens on here. This is an FDN lens. We can tell it's an FDN lens because it has the silver release button and the black ring at the back of the camera, and also the green A up here. This started being introduced with earlier lenses, and we'll take a look at one of those in a minute. To remove an FDN lens, push down on the silver button and twist counter or anti-clockwise until the red dot on the lens lines up with the red dot on the camera. No coincidence there. And now you can remove the lens. To remount the lens, a couple of important things here. Make sure that that red dot is not visible. Do not mount this lens with the depth of field activated because you can damage the camera if you do it. So make sure you can't see the red dot. Now we're going to grab this lens, and you can see that these two red dots, oops, you can see on the lens that there are two red dots here, this red dot and this one. These need to be lined up. If you took the lens off correctly, they're going to be lined up just fine. I've only seen these show up misaligned once or twice. It's kind of hard to do it. You really kind of have to be fiddling around with the lens to make that happen. But you want these two red dots to be lined up. When they are, you just line up red dot to red dot, camera and lens, and turn until it clicks, just like that. And you've remounted an FDN lens. Prior to FDN lenses, there were two other types of lenses called FD, so FD new, FD, and FL. I have no FL lenses, so we're going to pretend that this FD lens is an FL. The difference between an FD and an FL lens is that on FD, the aperture ring is on the back of the lens. On FL, I believe they are all or almost generally on the front of the lens. So first thing we're going to do to mount the FD or FL lens is we're going to remove the FDN lens. If you have a rear lens cap on, we're just going to rotate the silver ring anti-clockwise until the red dot here lines up with your focusing index right there. On this side, you can see that there's no red indicator dot, but there is usually, unless it's been worn off, a marking indicator right here. This one says M610, but you want to basically make sure that your red dot's lined up with your focus point, and then you're ready to go. Mounting this is fairly similar, red dot to red dot, and then you tighten the silver ring until it stops. There's no click with the FD lenses. Then this FDN lens has a green A on the aperture ring right here. This older FD lens has a green circle. Same exact functionality, which we'll talk about with the program mode use in this camera. Green circle means the same thing as green A. Some very old FD lenses, I've only seen a few of them, don't have the green circle, and those will not provide, if you have a lens like that, those will not provide automatic aperture control with the camera. Okay, to remove the FD lens, we simply rotate the silver ring and then remove it from the camera just like that, and we've removed the FD lens. FL lenses mount in the exact same way, just like this. FL lenses, however, do not communicate the aperture back to the camera. With this camera, if you have this lens right here, and I have it set to f4, the camera knows that it's set to f4. And yeah, you can look at it right now, and there's no, the aperture is wide open, right? When you focus, it's wide open, and when you push the shutter release, then the aperture closes down. Same exact process with an FDN lens, by the way. Just like that. And you can use the depth of field, and you can see that the aperture is going to close just like that. Okay. With an FL lens, however, you need to do something a little bit different, which is set your lens to the aperture. Actually, the ring is up here. So you set the lens to the aperture you want. Then, there we go. You engage your depth of field preview. And then will not be using program mode with an FL lens, but you can use any of the manual shutter speeds. And all you have to do is select the shutter speed that your camera says you need to use and disengage depth of field preview and take the photo without adjusting any of your settings. And that's how you use an FL lens with depth of field preview metering. Okay, that was a lot to go over. Next thing we're going to do, now that we have a battery in the camera and we have a lens and we can start using it, so we're going to actually get to a point where we can use it. We're going to load film in the camera. So we've seen how to get into the camera, but we're going to do that again. We're going to lift up the film rewind knob here and then open the back of the camera. You want to make sure that the fork is out of the way and that this knob is still lifted. 35mm film, cassette chamber. Push the fork down until it clicks into place and the knob is flush with the little mushroom base right there. Pull out a leader. We're going to feed it into the take-up spool right here. Just like that. And just like that, I'm going to put my finger right over the tension sprocket right here, not over the shutter. Don't touch the shutter like this, but you can put it over the tension sprocket and advance the film. And that will help ensure that the film stays on the take-up spool as you do your first frame. If you don't, and if you've seen any of my other videos, the film is always popping off of these. It takes me like 9 tries. So anyway, you've got your film loaded. Next thing you can do is close the back of the camera. We're going to tighten up the film in the cassette here right now, just like that. Okay, this will come in important in just a second. Before we get too far, we're going to adjust the film ASA. ASA and ISO are the same. When ASA stopped governing film speeds, ISO took over, just kept the numbers the same. So if you just loaded 400 ISO film, we're going to push the silver button down and adjust this dial until we see 400 lined up with the green index on the back, and now we've selected the film speed correctly. With this, if you have the lens cap off, you can use program mode. I tend to use a manual shutter speed so I know exactly how long the shutter is going to be and that it's not going to be 5 seconds. Advance, advance, advance. You can see here we're at the orange 1 in the frame count window. That tells us we're ready to go and start taking photos. And if you noticed, the film rewind knob over here as I advance the film is spinning. If the reason that I tightened this up earlier is that if this is spinning, we know that the film's moving through the camera because there's a mechanical connection, which we'll see in just a second, between the film take-up and this knob. That's what also allows us to rewind the film in just a few minutes. So there you go, you can see that. Film is one and done. It can record light a single time in a controlled manner with a proper shutter speed and exposure, or in an uncontrolled manner where it will absorb all of the photons possible if you do something like this. So if you open the back of the camera with your film like this, all of the photos on here will be erased. Okay, just so you know. What I'm doing is I want you to see what's going on inside of your camera so you can understand how all of this works. I'm going to pop this lever out here so you can see this a little bit more easily. If we take a picture and advance the film, you can see how the film is pulled up on the take-up spool here through the back of the camera, and as it's coming out of this, it's spinning the film rewind knob. There we go, just like that. Okay, so you're going through the day. You've taken your entire roll of film and you're ready to rewind it. If you just start rewinding it now, you're going to break something. So I'm going to push the film rewind button on the bottom, and now I'm going to start rewinding it. So as you rewind the film, it moves off of the take-up spool back through here, and the film rewind button disengages the sprocket so that it can spin backwards and your film can be taken back to the cassette. Okay, so you should generally be able to hear this with the back closed. I say as this film proceeds to make no noise whatsoever. Okay, but at any rate, what you're going to do is you're going to rewind and rewind and rewind. You'll hear a sound, and then when you finish rewinding, you'll rewind all of the film into the cassette. Okay, that's a really good way to make sure you don't accidentally reuse it a second time. This film has been in 55 or 60 videos now, so it has gotten really hard to remove from the cassette with my film leader retrievers, so I'm not going to rewind it the whole way. But the other thing you can do is you can leave yourself a little leader just like this, pull it out, and then when you're done, shove your leader back into your camera, and that, or into the cassette rather, and that will tell you not to reuse that film. Okay, so anyway, when you're done, you'd remove your roll of film, and then you can either put another one in, reload it, and keep going, or if you're done for the day, just close the back of the camera. Remember, don't open the back of the camera until you have rewound the film, or else you will erase your film. All right, next thing we're going to talk about is how to use a flash on this camera and some basic tips for flash use. Here's your flash hot shoe. And if you remember on the front, there's a flash cable port right here. So a flash PC cable looks like this guy right here. And if I take this little cap off, this end will plug right in there. It's called a PC port, not because it can connect to your computer. It can't. PC stands for Pronter Compor. And Pronter Compor, it's close enough, were old shutter makers that made shutters for lenses that can't mount on this camera. And so they made this standard sort of flash sync for using their leaf shutters with a flash. And when camera makers adopted a standard, they're like, that's a good thing. Well, let's just keep going with that. So that's how it got the name Pronter Comp, or PC port for Pronter Compor. So this is what the cable connection looks like. You can connect it there. And then this can connect to an off-camera flash, a radio retriever, a second flash. If your hot shoe's dead, this can connect to a flash that has a cable port on your hot shoe. So I personally always like a camera that has a PC port. My first film camera had a dead hot shoe, so I had to run a PC port cable up to it. Anyway, it happens. So you've got that option. You've also got this option, and you can plug a standard flash into this camera. This flash also has two contacts on the back of it, and those were called the quench and the neutral. I forget the names for sure of those two dots. And then the middle one is your trigger contact. And these three contacts allowed this camera to talk to Canon flashes. And what that allowed you to do is that whatever shutter speed you were in with one of those Canon flashes, it could do that. That had three ports on the back of it. This is not one of them. As you can see, it only has one port. But if you had a Canon flash that had all three contacts, then the camera would know it had a flash. And even if you were in 1/1000th of a second, it would trigger the shutter at 1/60th of a second. Same thing with program, it would shoot at 1/60th of a second. We'll talk about why that's important in just a second. So to mount a flash on your, and like I said, if you had a flash like this, a third party or something that only had one contact, what I just described would not happen with your camera. So to mount a flash on this camera, you just slide it right into the hot shoe, just like this, okay? Now, assuming that you're using a flash where you need to adjust the shutter speed, you'll want to set it to 1/60th of a second or slower. Anything as slow as bulb will work. Okay, so why is that? Shutter speeds on this camera are not controlled by how fast the shutter moves. The shutter curtains, which you've seen a couple times with the camera back open, there are two curtains. When you take a picture, the first one opens, and then the second one closes, and then when you advance the film, they do this, okay? At 1/60th of a second, the first curtain opens, the flash triggers because the entire film is open to light for about 1/60th of a second, and then the second curtain closes, and then you advance the film. At 2 seconds, the first curtain opens. At this point, the flash fires again. The shutter curtain stays open for 2 seconds. Second curtain goes, and then you advance the film. Okay, so what happens at 1/1000th of a second? First curtain, second curtain, just like this. So at any shutter speed faster than 1/60th of a second, the entire film plane is not open to light at any given time. So if your camera cannot detect that the flash is on there, if your flash only has one contact like this one does, it's going to trigger the flash at every shutter speed. That's just the way these are designed. But it's not going to compensate your shutter speed like it should. So if you have this set at 1/1000th in a flash like this, as soon as this curtain starts going, the second one's going to follow. Your flash will trigger at this point, and you'll have a little strip of illuminated light off to the side, with everything else being blocked by the curtain and black. So that's how your shutter speed sync works. Just something important to bear in mind. Next thing we're going to talk about is some basic flash technique. The worst possible place you can put a flash is right here, right on top of the camera, just like this. And the reason is that when you take a picture with a flash in this orientation, the light leaves the flash, reaches your subject, bounces back to your lens and your film. If you're taking a photo of a person and you have color film in here, they're going to have red eye. But even if you're using black and white film, because this is like a flat wall of photons, it's going to make your subject look flat and waxy. So there are a few things you can do if you are only going to mount a flash. Like this one can't connect to a cable, so it has to be mounted in the hot shoe. So there's one thing this flash can do to kind of mitigate that, which is tilt the flash head upwards. This way, if you're underneath a ceiling, you can use this to bounce the light off of the ceiling and illuminate your subjects from above. Why is that important, though? If you think about the way that we see people, if we're outside underneath the sun, if we're indoors underneath overhead lights, anytime we see someone or anything, they're lit from above. So our brains are wired to think of things that are lit from above as having been lit naturally and in a flattering manner. You want to replicate that with your flash to flatter your subjects as much as you possibly can. So this one tilts upwards. There are also flashes that have a swivel to them as well. So if you don't have a roof or a ceiling above you, you can tilt the flash off to the side and bounce it off the wall, or do a combination of both ceiling and wall, and get some flattering and spread out light in that way as well. If you are using a PC cable to connect your flash, you can use something called a flash bar. And what this does is this connects to the underside of the camera in the tripod socket here, and then it has its own tripod socket if you want to use it on a tripod. And then you would need an adapter to connect your flash to this tripod socket right here. And then what you can do is you can set your camera here, you can set your flash here, and now if you're shooting portrait orientation, if your flash head doesn't move, like some of them, the flash head is fixed in a shape like this, now you have a bounce flash. Or if your flash does move, you now have a bounce flash that can bounce off the wall and the ceiling. So that's a pretty quick way to do that. And if you're connected here, you can still reach your hand in here, do your focus, and take your photo. And this works exactly the same way as a flash that only has one single socket on it. When you're using a flash with a PC cable, the camera will not know that you're using it. So it'll work, you'll be stuck at manually setting 1/60th of a second or slower on your shutter speed if you do that. But that's some basic technique. Try to use bounce flash when you can. Try to avoid direct flash. And if you're buying a modern flash for your camera, which there are many good options for, there are also many good, very affordable options that have tilt and swivel heads, round about probably 40, 50, 60 bucks as of this video's recording, that can communicate with this camera directly. So if you are looking for a flash to do that, double check with whomever is selling it before you buy it to verify that your flash will work in that way. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at what the viewfinder in the camera looks like. I used to actually just hold the camera up to these. I don't have the capability to do that anymore. So here's a printout of what you would see if you look through the viewfinder. This is your focusing screen right here, and this is what the default focusing screen looks like. Split prism right here, and focusing collar and matte field. All right, so we're going to start in the middle. The split prism right here is a focusing aid. What you would want to do to make the split prism work is you'd want to find something that has a vertical line. Okay, it could be a lamppost, the edge of a building, something that is on plane with your subject. If you're taking a photo of a person and they're wearing glasses, pretend those are glasses. Vertical line right here, okay? Or here, if you're really close and you can get their pupil right here, you got a vertical line right there. Anyway, the way that this works is that if your vertical lines are split like this, they are not in focus. As you focus, the vertical lines will move back and forth, will move sideways. When the vertical lines are a single vertical line like this, your subject on that focusing plane is in focus. So the drawback to doing this with glasses, by the way, is that if you're using a very shallow depth of field like an f1.4, the frame of the glasses will be in focus, the person's pupil will not be. So at any rate, but that's how this works. This collar around here has a bunch of little microprisms in it, and when the subject is out of focus, they're very blurry. When it's in focus, it sort of snaps into focus. It's a little bit hard to describe exactly how it looks, but if you have one of these focusing screens in your camera, practice with it right now and you'll see what I mean. Then you have this matte field, which is called your composition field. You can focus on the matte field if you want to. If you have, let's say, you've got a mountain range up here, and then you've got like a little barn house down here or something, and you want to have this be in focus, you don't have to move your prism down here to line up the vertical of this barn house. You can get it to snap into focus as you on your focusing area here, and it will be in focus. So, but this holds the rest of the screen information. And then your central weighted zone that's a little bit big, but it's somewhere right around in here in the middle. That's going to provide the majority of your information for your metering, for your meter reading. Over here, what we have are the bunch of different information the camera tells you. Down here on the bottom, this is your flash indicator. If you have a flash on your camera that can communicate with your camera, this will light up when the flash is ready to fire. Canon flashes that have those 3 contacts will communicate with your AE-1 program and tell the AE-1 program to light this up when they're ready to go. That way you don't have to look at the back of your flash to figure that out. Come back to this in just a second. This P indicates you're in program mode. So if you set your shutter speed dial here to program, this will light up. M indicates you're in manual mode. If you set your aperture ring to an aperture which is not the A, you're telling the camera that you're going to shoot in manual mode, and that will light up to tell you, hey, you're in manual mode, just make sure that that's where you want to be. Now, these numbers right here are different aperture numbers, f1 being the fastest that this camera can talk to, f32 being the slowest. This is also the range of apertures that Canon lenses came in over the years, especially when this was being made. I mean, I know they did have a 50mm 0.95. That's close enough to f1 that if this camera can use it, I'm not even sure it can, that's what would line up. Anyway, for the 3 of you out there who have that lens, you might run into an issue with that. For the rest of you who will be using something like an f1.4 or a slightly slower f1.8 or f2.8, it's very popular. I have an f2.8 on this lens, on this camera right now. This is the range you're going to go up to. Most lenses only go up to 16 or 22. 32 would be for some things like a handful of the telephotos, and the macro lenses go to 32. I think some of them do anyway. So anyway, what's going to happen is that this information is going to change slightly based on how you're using the camera in your shooting mode. Shooting modes? What do I mean by that? Well, we're going to get out of order here on the script, and we're going to talk about shooting modes right now and how they inform this information. So we've talked a little bit, we've danced around this subject. We're going to go straight here into program. We're going to go into A on the aperture ring. So we're going to start here. This camera has 3 shooting modes: full program, shutter priority, and full manual. It does not have aperture priority. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about now how to set each of the modes, and as we do, we're going to talk about what they are. Full program is going to require the A on your lens be set just like this, and your camera be set to program mode. In full program mode, the camera is going to do all of the thinking for you. It will pick the shutter speed and aperture. You're not going to know the shutter speed, but it will tell you the aperture. So when you look through your viewfinder in program mode, one of these numbers is going to light up. That's the aperture, or very close to the aperture, because I believe that shutter speed and aperture are stepless in program mode, that your camera is going to use to indicate. So let's say, for instance, you're outside and you're in program mode, and it says f5.6. It's going to use f5.6. Who knows what shutter speed? Okay, so that's program mode and how you set it. What if you wanted to do shutter priority, which is the second mode? Program mode is fully automatic. Shutter priority is what they call semi-automatic, meaning that part of it's automatic and part of it's manual. To do shutter priority, just switch this out of program mode. Your camera is now going to shoot at 1/500th of a second if you have it set like this. Whatever number lights up here, that's the aperture your camera is going to use. And if a number is blinking, it cannot give you an aperture with that shutter speed. So what does that mean? Okay, so let's say you're at 1/500th of a second and your camera lights up f/5.6. You're going to take an exposure that's at 1/500th of a second for your shutter speed and f/5.6 for your aperture. Okay, but it's like super bright outside and you're using 1600 ISO film and you have it set at 1/500th and the f/32 is blinking. What that means is you need something like an f/45 or f/64 aperture, which none of these lenses can reach, so you will get an overexposed image if you try. The camera will give you the smallest aperture that the lens can reach at your shutter speed, but it's still going to be overexposed. So let's pretend you have an f/32 lens on here and you switch it to 1/1000th and now that's solid. Good, that means you're going to do 1/1000th of a second at f/32. Okay. So we're at 1/30th of a second, and we have a very fast lens on here. It goes to f1.4, and we have, say, 100 ISO film in here, and we are indoors, and it's dark, and the 1.4 is blinking down here. What that means is that you do not have enough light to get a proper exposure, and your image is going to be very dark at 1/30th and f1.4. So if you adjust your shutter speed maybe to a full second, of course, you're going to need a tripod or something to keep your camera steady when you take this photo, and now f1.4 is solid, then that tells you that at 1 second you're going to get an f1.4 aperture with this setting. Okay, so that's how shutter priority works. You pick the shutter speed and have the lens in A or green dot for the older FD lenses, and then the camera will pick the best aperture for you. Okay, what about full manual? In full manual mode, you take the lens out of A or green circle, like that, and now your green M is going to light up, and what's going to happen is you're going to select an aperture and a shutter speed. Okay, so let's say you're at 1/125th and f8, just like that, but f2.8 is blinking. Wow, that's actually exactly what my lighting tells me it needs to be. Okay, so here at 1/125th and f8 and f2.8 is blinking. That means you need to select f2.8 just like that. Even when you select f2.8, it will continue to blink in the light meter here. So the blinking doesn't indicate that you are set correctly or incorrectly. It indicates that's what you need to be at. So for full manual mode, if you are set correctly and you take a picture, you will have a proper exposure. If you set your aperture to f11 when f2.8 is blinking, you will have a very underexposed image. Okay. Likewise, let's say you're up here and f16 is solid, but you set it to f5.6 and take a picture. You're going to have a very overexposed image because in full manual mode, whatever shutter speed and aperture you select, the camera's going to do that regardless of whether or not it's correct. In shutter priority and program mode, the camera will give you a proper exposure if the lighting and the film and the available settings allow it to, and if not, it will blink to tell you that it can't. Okay. So on paper, it seems like aperture priority mode should work. Set this to program, set this to any aperture, and the camera knows what it's set to, and it knows it's in program, so it should just give you a proper shutter speed for your aperture, right? Unfortunately not, and I can't tell you why, whether that's something that was done deliberately or if it's a limitation of the technology at the time that doesn't happen. But if you have a setting like this, what's going to happen is that your camera will actually fire at 1/1000th of a second regardless of what the lighting says. So if you're using an FL lens like this, you have to be shooting in manual mode. FL lenses are not compatible with program mode. FD and FDN lenses are. So if you have the green A or the green circle, you can shoot program mode with this camera. FL, you must shoot full manual. But if you are using an FD with the green circle or an FDN lens and you set a manual aperture and you set it to program, it will always give you 1/1000th of a second. And if the lighting is perfect and that's what you need, then great, you have a good exposure. Most of the time that won't be the case, and so you will end up with something that doesn't turn out. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to switch out the viewfinder focusing screens on this camera. Took me quite a while to find a grid focusing screen. Personal preference, I will always go for a grid focusing screen if I can get one. Took me a while to find it, and I haven't put it in this camera yet, so we're going to try it right now. So the first thing we got to do is remove this lens. We're going to do that just like that. Next thing we have to do is take out the existing focusing screen. There's a little clip right here on the front, and all you have to do is pull that forward, or the way that the manual says you should do it is like this. Come on. I should have practiced this before I did the video. Okay, it's clipped in place. I'm going to push up. There we go. And now I've pulled out the old focusing screen. Okay. Never actually done this the correct way. I've always done it absolutely the way you're not supposed to. Okay, that focusing screen is held in place securely, and what we're going to do is we're going to hold it and put it face down right here for right now, and push these back in like that. Is that how it goes? This looks like there should just be a really easy trick to make this pop out, and I am not sure what it is. So when you're taking this out, this will be inside of the camera, and this part you're seeing right now goes towards the mirror. When you slide this in, it hooks into this metal frame, and then it clicks into place. Okay. So to remove it, you hold the metal frame here, and you grab these two wings, and you just push them back a little bit, and it should just click right out. There we go, just like that. Next thing we're going to do is I'm going to hold this here, and I'm going to get the grid frame clipped into my little tool here. Drop this in, metal frame up, because that's how the grid frame was. And there we go. That's a little bit better. Now to get it mounted, we're just going to slide it right in here. Back first, lift it up, and now it should just click right out like that. That is how that works. Okay, and now there's a grid frame that's been mounted to replace the split prism. There's also a matte frame, and I think it was the other option that you could have to install here. We've gone over everything with this camera except for two things. The first is how to take a photo, and the second is how to do double exposure. So we've pretty much seen how to take a photo. All you have to do is dial in your settings. You're going to pick whether you're going to shoot in full program, shutter priority, or full manual mode, right? You're going to figure out exactly how you're going to shoot. You're going to dial in your settings based on what the meter tells you, and that's it. That's how you take a photo. Make sure your ISO is set correctly, make sure your settings are correct, and then you just take a photo by pushing down on the shutter speed dial. Okay, photos are really easy. What about double exposures? Well, let's talk about the science of the double exposure really quickly, and then we'll talk about the many, many different ways you can do it with this camera. With a double exposure, let's say you're using 400 ISO film. That 400 ISO film is like sitting here going, okay, a certain number of photons are going to reach me, and I'll give you a proper exposure. Way, way, way more photons than that, and I'm going to be really dark, thick, or dense. That's three words that mean that too many photons have reached the film. You're going to end up with low contrast, whether you digitize it or print it in the darkroom, and you're going to end up with long print times in the darkroom and a lot of digital noise if you digitize it. So film is forgiving, but you still want to give it the proper number of photons. So let's say that you have 400 ISO film, and the camera says 1/125th of a second at f/5.6 is the correct shutter speed and aperture combination for this light with this film. And you take a single picture, and you advance, and that's how you take a photo. Okay, great. So for double exposures, the film is going to need to have half as much light, because if it receives the proper amount of light, and then again the proper amount of light, it will have too much, and you'll get that thick negative. So to give it half as much light, there are a bunch of different things you can do. The easiest is to know that you're going to shoot in whatever manual shutter speed you're using. So let's say f/5.6 and 1/125th of a second, just like this, okay? You can override this setting very quickly with manual mode by you need to cut the amount of light in half. each number here that's marked is a single stop. Each number up here is a single stop. 400 to 800 ISO is a single stop. 800 ISO film needs half as much light as 400, so you could think of it as f5.6 at 1/125th with 400 ISO film. 800 ISO film would need 1/250th. Okay, we'll see why the ISO information is germane in a second. But these are fractions. So whatever film you're using, if you're doing this in manual mode, all you have to do is cut the amount of light in half. 1/250th of a second is half as long as 1/125th. Just like 1/125th is half as long as 1/60th. Okay, but you really want to use 1/125th as your shutter speed. So we're going to do this with the aperture, and that's not quite as clear. f5.6 is half as much light as f4. So what we need to do is take f5.6 and set it to f8. And that will give us half as much light as f5.6. Okay, so when you are adjusting these to get half as much light to do a manual double exposure, you always go to the next higher number, and that will give you half as much light. Okay, so to do the double exposure, take the first photo. But, oh, if we just advance it, it's not a double exposure, it's just a single underexposed frame. So the mechanics of the double exposure are to take the photo, hold the film rewind knob right here. You should actually tighten this before you do your double exposure, but I forgot to mention that, so we're just going to hold it. Hold the film rewind button on the bottom right here. And holding all of this, now you advance the film. It's kind of fiddly to do that backwards. You rearm the shutter, as you can see because I just took another photo, but because you were holding the film rewind button and the film rewind knob, you didn't advance the film. Now you let go of both of those and advance, and you finished your double exposure, right? No, not exactly, because the gearing doesn't engage instantly. So when you advance the film after your double exposure, you start advancing the film, and the film might not move the whole way. So if you take another photo now, you're going to have a partial frame overlap. So what you do is you set this to f22, you set this to 1/1000th of a second, you put your cap on your lens right here, or if you've lost your cap, well, firstly buy a new one, but if you've lost your cap, you put that over your leg or something, and you take what's called a dead frame, and that will move the film out of the way so that you don't accidentally overlap and ruin your double exposure. Okay, great. So that we've done that for manual mode, but you know what? Really, I like using Program. I want to use Program for this. There's a very easy way to do that. We come down here to the ISO dial, or ASA dial, actually, as it's called, but we know we're at 400 ISO right now, and we have 400 speed film in. We need half as much light, and as I mentioned before, 800 needs half as much light. So we're going to just set this to 800. We're going to trick the camera into giving us that double exposure meter reading. So now whether you're in Program mode or shutter priority mode, the camera is going to give you half as much light because you've adjusted the ASA, the film speed, as you actually should have. Okay, so you take your first photo, you hold all the stuff you need to hold, advance, take your second photo. The nice thing about this is that if you're doing a setting like this, you don't have to worry about metering. You could take these photos separated by 30 seconds or 30 minutes in completely different lighting conditions if you wanted to, and the camera's meter, because you've adjusted the film speed, will figure out the correct speed for the correct shutter and aperture combination for what you've got. Now when you've done your second photo and your double exposure, push the silver button, and we're going to go back to 400 ISO because that's the type of film we have loaded in here. Because if we don't do that, the whole rest of the film is going to be underexposed by a stop, and we don't want that because none of the photos will turn out. And that's that. That's everything about the Canon AE-1 program that we have to talk about in this video. So thank you all very much for watching. I hope this was very helpful. I will see you in the next camera manual video.